Hello. We are continuing our conversation about the Cold War. In fact, we're going to finish our conversation about the Cold War up in these next series of videos. We are still in the textbook. It is Prentice Hall, United States History, Modern America. You can find a digital copy of this online at the National Emergency Archives or the National Emergency Library. So we're going to talk about what is going on at home during the Cold War, why it matters. Americans have often faced the difficult task of balancing the need to provide national security with the need to protect people's rights and freedoms. In times of crisis, rights have sometimes been limited. Beginning in the late 1940s, the Cold War dominated American life. For some of those years, the nation was in the grip of a new Red Scare. The hunt for communists netted some spies, but it also disrupted the lives of thousands of innocent Americans. Focus question: how did fear of domestic communism affect American society during the Cold War? Worrying about communists at home. The Cold War influenced many aspects of American life. American soldiers fought and died in Korea. Industries hammered with activity, turning out weapons and supplies. Americans read newspaper articles about who lost to China or who was winning the space race. Popular culture reflected an us versus them attitude: Democrats versus totalitarians, capitalists versus communists, the West versus the East. In the end, the Cold War was turning out to be every bit as global as encompassing as World War II had been. Truman roots out communists. The fear that communists, both outside and inside America, were working to destroy American life created a reaction known as the Red Scare. This fear was not unique to the late 1940s and 1950s. In 1917, the Russian Revolution and the communist call for worldwide revolution had led to a similar Red Scare in 1919 and 1920. However, the Red Scare that followed World War II went deeper and wider and lasted far longer than the earlier Red Scare. Truman's Attorney General J. Howard McGrath expressed the widespread fear of communist influence when he warned that communists are everywhere, in factories, offices, butcher stores, on street corners, and even in private business. And each carries in himself the death of our society. The spread of communism into Eastern Europe and Asia raised concerns that American communists, some in influential government positions, were working for the enemy. In truth, some American communists were agents of the Soviet Union, and a handful of them held high-ranking positions in government. However, overwhelmingly, government officials were loyal to the United States. Recognizing public concern about domestic communism, President Truman created a federal employee loyalty program in March of 1947. The order permitted the FBI and other government security agencies to screen federal employees for signs of political disloyalty. About 3,000 federal employees were dismissed or resigned after the investigation. The order also empowered the Attorney General to compile a list of totalitarian, fascist, or subversive organizations in the United States. Americans who belonged to or supported such organizations that were on the Attorney General's list were singled out for more intense scrutiny. Many were labeled security risks and dismissed from their jobs. The Truman administration also used the 1940 Smith Act to cripple the Communist Party in the United States. This act made it unlawful to teach or advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. In 1949, a New York jury found 11 communists guilty of violating the Smith Act and sent them to prison. Congress hunts communists. Congress joined in the search for communists. In 1938, the House of Representatives had created the House of Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, to investigate possible subversive activities by fascists, Nazis, or communists. After the war, the committee conducted several highly publicized hearings on communist activities in the United States. HUAC investigators probed the government, armed forces, unions, education, science, newspapers, and other aspects of American life. The best-known HUAC hearings targeted the movie industry in 1947. The HUAC investigations uncovered people who were or had been communists during the 1930s and 40s. A group of left-wing writers, directors, and producers known as the Hollywood 10 refused to answer questions, asserting their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. The hearings turned into a war of attacks and counterattacks as committee members and witnesses yelled at each other and pointed accusatory fingers. After the hearings, the Hollywood 10 were criticized for contempt of Congress and were tried, convicted, and sent to prison. Many executives circulated a blacklist of entertainment figures who should not be hired because of their suspected communist ties. The careers of those on the list were shattered. Not until the case of Watkins versus the United States in 1957 did the Supreme Court decide that witnesses before HUAC could not be forced to name radicals they knew. The HUAC investigation had a powerful impact on filmmaking. In the past, Hollywood had been willing to make movies about controversial subjects such as racism and anti-Semitism. Now, most producers concentrated only on entertainment and avoided addressing sensitive social issues. Freedom of speech takes a hit. The case of the Hollywood 10 demonstrated that in the mood of fear created by Soviet aggression, freedom of speech was not guaranteed. Americans lost their jobs because they belonged to or contributed to an organization on the Attorney General's list. Others were fired for associating with people who were known communists or for making remarks that were considered disloyal. Teachers, librarians, mail carriers, and longshoremen, electricians, and construction workers, people from all walks of life, might be accused and dismissed from their jobs. The effort to root out communist influence from American life cut across many levels of society. Communists were exposed and blacklisted in the country's academic institutions, labor unions, scientific laboratories, and city halls. Government investigates Oppenheimer. The case of J. Robert Oppenheimer illustrates the difficulty of distinguishing loyalty from disloyalty. During World War II, Oppenheimer had led the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb. After the war, he became chairman of the General Advisory Committee for the United States Atomic Energy Commission. However, Oppenheimer had ties to people who belonged to the Communist Party, including his wife and brother. In 1954, the American Atomic Energy Commission denied Oppenheimer access to classified information, although the AEC had no evidence that Oppenheimer himself had ever been disloyal to the United States. It questioned whether his communist ties disqualified him from holding the position. Checkpoint. What steps did Truman and Congress take to investigate communist influence in the United States? Well, Truman's Attorney General created a list of organizations that they deemed to be un-American, and Congress created a group that investigated un-American activities. So that wraps up what we're talking about in terms of the Cold War at home for today. We're going to continue talking about this in the next few videos. Until then, stay safe and goodbye.